Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon, and welcome to our second session of the RETHINK Final Seminar. Sorry for the delay. Sorry for the delay, but we had some technical problems, but we're all set to have this session today. I will try to share my screen quickly. Yesterday we had our first day, and we had a very interesting talk of Nena Mochnik on what effective remembrance education is, what does that mean, and how can we make it sustainable. She was convinced that remembrance education should be mandatory at university and school level, and shared her ideas on the difference between remembrance education and history education. If that's what we did yesterday. If you weren't able to attend the first session, don't worry. We have registered everything, and you can find it if you go to our website and click on the link to Facebook or YouTube. After the final seminar, so after tomorrow, all the sessions will also be available on our website. For today, I would like to introduce you to Wouter Cenada, our speaker of today. He is happily married, he told me, and is father of 3 sons. And he started as a teacher in primary school, but he works since 2005 as an educational collaborator for the city museums of Ypres, which also includes the famous In Flanders Fields Museum. The educational department of this museum would like to be, and I quote from their website, a listening ear for anyone who wants to set up a remembrance and/or peace education project, end of quote. They emphasize on tailor-made programs that answer the needs of a school group or other groups, and Wouter is willing to give during his lecture more insight on how remembrance education is brought to the classroom. I give the floor to you, Wouter.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all. Yes, I see some heads going up and down, so nice to hear. Sorry because of the delay, because the delay, it's all my fault. Well, not really my fault, it's fault of the system right here. I presume that internet and Ypres doesn't go well sometimes, so sorry for that. Luckily, I have Alicia Valenti, who will help me with the presentation, because she's having every power in her hands to do the presentation for me, so thank you very much. In a country where war has raged, it lingers, even if that war is already a century behind us. For each of the more than 600,000 dead who fell in Belgium, for each of the more than 425,000 graves and names on memorials, and for the hundreds of traces and relics in the front region, for each of the million affected, physically and psychologically wounded, refugees, deportees, there's a story of grief and pain or ordeal somewhere in the world. The In Flanders Fields Museum conserves the link with war past, because nature of war does not change over time. The museum considers presenting this war story to be a universal and contemporary message of peace, and therefore as an important social mission. The museum works closely with partners who share its mission and works within the framework of Ypres CESIE of Peace. Good afternoon. I'm Wouter, part of the educational department of the In Flanders Fields Museum. Being born and growing up in a region where you have a daily confrontation with the result of war gives you another view of what's war all about. So there's a reason why I'm doing this job. If only my children can say, Daddy, well, yeah, he has tried, you know. As a museum, we are part of the Committee for Remembrance Education and helped with the development of Touchstone. During this presentation, I would like to show you how we apply this nicely designed scheme in practice. But as a starter, I would like to give the floor to someone who is confronted with war on daily basis. Rudy Franks.
Rudy Franks is a war journalist. In addition to making reports and documentaries for public service broadcaster VRT, he also writes books. He's been doing this job for over 30 years. What does war mean to him?
Oorlog is met grootschalig geweld.
War is the large-scale use of violence in order to reach a certain goal. This goal can be related to religion, nationalism, conquering territory, or the expansion of power. In the days of von Clausewitz, this was invariably interpreted as a struggle between nation-states. In modern times, however, the term means something different entirely. War is a method, a kind of regime, religious madness, or whatever you wish to call it, that is installed through the use of extreme violence. This is a form of war. It can target a country's own population, but it can also involve the struggle for the conquest of other areas within other states. This too is war. I think it's impossible to wage war or to drag people into an armed conflict on a large scale without a trigger. Fear can be such a trigger. Fear and hatred can also rear their ugly head in the course of a conflict, whipped up by war rhetoric. In my opinion, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but the human behavior that fuels that mechanism remains the same. It might be hatred, it might be fear or manipulation through lies and propaganda. And that, to me, are two of the essential ingredients of war, namely propaganda and lies. The most recent conflict I followed with great attention is the struggle against IS and the so-called caliphate. On the one hand, there's the propaganda, the extremist propaganda of people living in their own world. And on the other hand, you have the war rhetoric, which in my honest opinion was justified. So no, the mechanisms are the same. The way in which people react is also the same. And what really frightens me is that we don't realize on time how these mechanisms work. You see, it starts with pointing fingers and laying blame, exposing any problem that you find important or give priority to for some reason. It can be economic misery, a feeling of humiliation or discrimination, nationalist or religious sentiments or whatever. Then you go in search of a scapegoat. In the 1930s, it was the Jews and the homosexuals and gypsies were also targeted. Now it's migrants and Muslims and so on. You look for a scapegoat, you label them, and in some cases it ends in the dehumanization of the other side. And that to me is the most detrimental aspect of war, the dehumanization of the enemy. The moment you no longer regard the enemy as human, you can do with them as you please. And it starts with one thing, and it becomes a system.
One of the main focus points of the In Flanders Fields Museum is precisely the individual. What impact does such a conflict have on people? What are their stories? To Rudy Franks, this is very recognizable.
Maar dat is ook hoe ik mijn job invul als oorlogsverslaggever. Je gaat in de eerste plaats kijken wat doet.
That is also how I approach my job as a war correspondent. You start by answering the question, what effect does war have on people? That's one thing. And then you try to put a face on that war and give the people in that war a face and a voice. And if you give people a face and a voice, they can no longer be dehumanized. Actually, the only antidote we have to offer, and museums as well, is giving people a face and a voice in times of war. Because from then on, we have no choice but to see them, to look them in the eye, and listen to them.
Rudy mentioned already two important parts of our scheme: knowledge and insight, empathy and involvement. The mechanisms are the same, the way in which people react is also the same. And what really frightens me is that we don't realize on time how these mechanisms work. As a museum, as an educational department, it's our job to bring this knowledge and insight. History has taught us many, many things, and there are plenty of examples of those mechanisms. Our job is to confront youngsters with the historical consequences of those mechanisms, hoping that they start to realize how they work. The ideal potting soil for conflict and war are fear, hate, lies, and propaganda. The lie of how fun war can be, just look at his smile. And even the message that we'll be home by Christmas. Spreading hatred by dehumanizing the other, they are monsters. The divine maidens waiting for you when you go to war. Where have you heard that message before? And yes, war costs money, so take your responsibility and fill up the savings account. The result justified the deed, and yes, it works. Just before leaving, Simon Lazare wrote a letter to his mom. Dear mom, I'm going to Liège tomorrow. Followed by, it's better to die while doing my job than to live and have done nothing at all. And after war, you have the story of trying to deal with the remembrance. I'd like to show you a small part of an item in the news of September 2014. We follow the 80-year-old Colin, who, together with his children, has returned to the place where it all happened.
Colin is nu 80 en kon zijn twee zonen en dochter overtuigen hem naar de Somme te vergezellen. Zijn vader en hun grootvader Sidney was pas 12 toen hij dienst nam.
He lied about his age and he ran away from home and away from school and signed up with the East Surrey Regiment. And he was moved to the Somme here in May 1916 and served there for 6 weeks until grandmother got him out in early August. Well, August, late August actually, I think.
And she didn't know where he was?
No, she couldn't find him.
Toen moeder Louise te weten kwam waar haar zoon zat, schreef ze naar het ministerie van Oorlog dat hem prompt terugstuurde naar huis.
And that's him looking disconsolate as he's being dismissed from the army.
He was quite a sturdy fellow for
Yeah, he was a big guy. Well, he was tall anyway.
He was tall.
Yeah.
Het Imperial War Museum in Londen bewaart alle documenten die op Sidney Lewis betrekking hebben.
When a soldier turned up at the recruitment office, they didn't necessarily have to provide any proof of their name or their age or anything like that. It was really down to the recruitment officer whether they would just take the person's word.
Het museum heeft de brief van het ministerie aan Sidney's moeder.
I have to inform you that action has been taken and the lad will be discharged with all possible speed. There was no, oh, I'm sorry, we've made a huge mistake, or it was just, that's what's going to happen.
Bijna 100 jaar nadat zijn vader op precies deze plek dekking moest zoeken voor de Duitse granaatinslagen, mijmert Colin over de verhalen van zijn vader, die hij nooit geloofde.
I just dismissed it because I thought, well, he's too young, he must be pulling my leg. Well, not pulling my leg, but telling a whopper. In other words, a lie, you know. But and I regret it now, of course, because I'm very proud of what he did, and I would have liked to have told him how proud I was of his efforts.
I'm very proud of what he did. A 12-year-old kid ran away from school, ran away from home, and the only reason why they sent him back was because of the letter of his mother. There's a huge chance that if she had not done so, there would be never any mention of old Colin and his children walking in former frontline zone. But okay, yes, it's a family story and you have to interpret it that way as well. But what shocked me the most was what followed. Colin's story set things in motion. Something like this should not be allowed to fall into oblivion, and money was needed for that, £500 to be exactly, an amount that was collected very quickly. And the result? A commemorative plaque on the facade of the house of birth with following message. Youngest British soldier, First World War, age 12, lived here. Hooray! Yeah, well, this kind of memorial boards offers many possibilities. Back to the photo of the unveiling of this plaque. From the window, a boy dressed in British uniform looks proudly at the crowd. There's a reason why we as a museum do not believe in reenactment. There was another thing in the story of Rudy that was for us quite interesting to hear about empathy and involvement. If you give people a face and a voice, they can no longer be dehumanized. Actually, the only antidote we have to offer, and museums as well, is giving people a face and a voice in times of war. This is what we try as a museum as well.
Toen ik in de lagere school zat, klonk het verhaal van de Wereldoorlog 1 vrij simpel. Je had de Belg, de Fransman, de Engelsman, die vocht tegen de Duits en later is een Amerikaan ook nog gekomen. Ja, dat zijn er 5. Het was misschien toch net iets meer. Uit meer dan 120 verschillende landen zijn mensen naar hier gekomen om te vechten. Ook de Senegalezen waren hier aanwezig. Max Deauville schreef het volgende. 'S Morgens komen in de vernielde straten Senegalezen voorbij. Ze dragen hun kameraden op de rug. Die arme duivels lopen op blote voeten. Aan het einde van hun magere benen hangen hun voeten gezwollen als kinderhoofden. Elke dag komen er weer al 15 aan met bevroren voeten. Ze lijden heel erg. Dikke tranen biggelen langs hun fletse kaken.
Op onze website vind je de namenlijst. Hier vind je de namen terug van alle dodelijke slachtoffers die naar aanleiding van de Eerste Wereldoorlog in België zijn gevallen. 600.000 namen uit meer dan 120 verschillende landen.
In deze vitrine liggen voorwerpen van soldaten uit verschillende continenten. Daar zijn soms heel exotische voorwerpen bij. Een traditioneel hoofddeksel van een Franse chasseur met de naam Tchetcha. Of een waaiertje van een Russisch krijgsgevangene. Een Nepalees hakmes, dat behoorde tot de traditionele wapenuitrusting van de Gurkhas, een kukri. In honderdduizenden gezinnen bleef er dus voor altijd de stoel leeg aan de keukentafel. Symbolisch stuurde daarom meer dan 120 landen een stoel naar hier.
Het is dus duidelijk dat die grote oorlog de hele wereld getroffen heeft.
Giving people a face, a voice, a name. The name list that our museum created brings together all the names of all the people that died in Belgium because of the First World War. All the names, not just ours. War has always been the story of we against the others, but the result is the same, creating victims. Not only soldiers, but civilians as well. This list contains 600,000 names. Every name is a story of loss. Every name confronts a family with somebody who will never return. An empty chair at the table. And beside the face, voice and name, there's another powerful thing in our region, the silent witness. Barry Bromley, he came over many times, and after a while he even stayed in Belgium, looking for the story of his grandfather in the First World War. This is one small quote of what he said. In Britain, we've got books that are written in English, and it shows a very one-side story, where we get in troop ships, we go over, we fight the war, we come home on leave, we go back again, the war finishes, we come home, and there's a big party. Whereas the war in Belgium or France is a totally different war, where people's houses were invaded, there's collaboration, land destroyed, poisoned from all chemicals, people's houses are destroyed. It's a totally different war that we don't see in Britain. Edmund Blunden belonged to the Royal Sussex Regiment, and he wrote a book of what happened during the war. Just one phrase from Undertones of War that he wrote in 1924. I must go over the ground again. Going over the ground again. This is what you just can do here on this spot here in this former front line. Going over the ground where it all happened. Listening to the voice of that silent witness.
Men vertelt dat na Wereldoorlog 1 geen enkele boom hier in Yper nog recht stond. Klopt niet helemaal, er zijn er hier en daar nog een paar. En moesten we, net zoals hier in de strip, de klankentapper, waar ze geluiden kunnen opvangen uit voorwerpen en de bomen hun verhalen beluisteren, dan zal er heel wat te weten komen.
In zekere zin vertellen bomen dus verhalen. Maar alleen is het jammer dat je ze daarvoor eerst moet omhakken. In ons museum heb je een stamschijf, die ooit in het kasteelpark van Elverdingen stond, een deelgemeente van Yper. Bij het tellen van de jaringen ontdekten we dat de boom er kwam in 1760. Dat hij Belg werd in 1831 en dat zijn blaadjes zelfs de uitlaatgassen zouden inademen van de eerste auto's. En de zwarte vlekken die we zien zijn littekens van een Duitse vliegtuigboom.
De boom hier achter mij, je ziet er 4, maar eigenlijk is het maar 1. 2 wereldoorlogen heeft hij overleefd, eerste en de tweede. Na Wereldoorlog 1 volledig kapotgeschoten, wat er nog overbleef was de stam. Maar uit die stam zijn 4 scheuten beginnen groeien en blijven groeien. Hij staat er nu nog altijd.
Om de herinnering aan de oorlog levend te houden, werden in 2014 herdenkingsbomen geplant op de frontlijnen van weleer. We weten waar de frontlijnen lagen door luchtfoto's van toen te bekijken. De blauw omkaderde boompjes tonen ons de geallieerde frontlijn. De rood omkaderde de Duitse. Die frontlijnen konden soms heel erg dicht bij elkaar liggen. En ertussen lag niemandsland.
En zo zie je dat het verhaal in ons museum ook in het hedendaagse landschap te ontdekken valt.
Going back to the touchstone of Remembrance education, several items already have been to our attention, but what about reflecting on current events? Well, unfortunately, even that isn't very difficult. Just one picture. This is a picture of a photo that has been taken in a classroom between 1916 and 1917 in De Panne, a small town near the Belgian coast. A classroom, an exercise where children in the class heard what to do in case of a gas attack. Idlib, 2018. A mother trying to protect her children, sponsored by Pepsi. The mechanisms are the same. The way in which people react is also the same. And what really frightens me is that we don't realize on time how these mechanisms work. I already mentioned it. It's our job to show to youngsters what those mechanisms are. And as a matter of fact, you're bringing a story of war, but then you realize, you've read many history books, that they're trying to defend a story of loss. How can you defend the story of loss? By pretending the loss was necessary for higher costs. This war was the end of all wars, because that was, as a matter of fact, after a while, the idea. Yes, we had this war because it's necessary, because this war will end all wars. Well, yeah, sad but true. At the end of our museum, we have created a list of all the wars that took place after the First World War. It's a direct way to reflect and realize that the mechanisms are still active. Thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you maybe sometime in our museum.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for your presentation. Before going to the Q&A, I propose to have a small break of 10 minutes. So we'll be back at 5 before 5. And in the meanwhile, you can send your questions or remarks through the chat function to us, and we will and Wouter will be happy to answer your questions. Hello and welcome back to our session. I hope you all enjoyed your small coffee break. We would like to come back to the presentation of Wouter, and as we experience many technical issues, there is one clip that we would like to share with you, and it's the audio clip of Franks, and I think Alicia will share it with us in a minute. And then we can go to your questions that we received. Here we go.
Rudy Franks is a war journalist. In addition to making reports and documentaries for public service broadcaster VRT, he also writes books. He's been doing this job for over 30 years. What does war mean to him?
Oorlog is met grootschalig geweld.
War is the large-scale use of violence in order to reach a certain goal. This goal can be related to religion, nationalism, conquering territory, or the expansion of power. In the days of von Clausewitz, this was invariably interpreted as a struggle between nation-states. In modern times, however, the term means something different entirely. War is a method, a kind of regime, religious madness, or whatever you wish to call it, that is installed through the use of extreme violence. This is a form of war. It can target a country's own population, but it can also involve the struggle for the conquest of other areas within other states. This too is war. I think it's impossible to wage war or to drag people into an armed conflict on a large scale without a trigger. Fear can be such a trigger. Fear and hatred can also rear their ugly head in the course of a conflict, whipped up by war rhetoric. In my opinion, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but the human behavior that fuels that mechanism remains the same. It might be hatred, it might be fear or manipulation through lies and propaganda. And that, to me, are two of the essential ingredients of war, namely propaganda and lies. The most recent conflict I followed with great attention is the struggle against IS and the so-called caliphate. On the one hand, there's the propaganda, the extremist propaganda of people living in their own world. And on the other hand, you have the war rhetoric, which in my honest opinion was justified. So no, the mechanisms are the same. The way in which people react is also the same. And what really frightens me is that we don't realize on time how these mechanisms work. You see, it starts with pointing fingers and laying blame, exposing any problem that you find important or give priority to for some reason. It can be economic misery, a feeling of humiliation or discrimination, nationalist or religious sentiments or whatever. Then you go in search of a scapegoat. In the 1930s, it was the Jews and the homosexuals, and gypsies were also targeted. Now it's migrants and Muslims and so on. You look for a scapegoat, you label them, and in some cases, it ends in the dehumanization of the other side. And that, to me, is the most detrimental aspect of war, the dehumanization of the enemy. The moment you no longer regard the enemy as human, you can do with them as you please. And it starts with one thing, and it becomes a system.
One of the main focus points of the In Flanders Fields Museum is precisely the individual. What impact does such a conflict have on people? What are their stories? To Rudy Franks, this is very recognizable.
Maar dat is ook hoe ik mijn job invul als oorlogsverslaggever. U gaat in de eerste plaats kijken wat doet.
That is also how I approach my job as a war correspondent. You start by answering the question, what effect does war have on people? That's one thing. And then you try to put a face on that war and give the people in that war a face and a voice. And if you give people a face and a voice, they can no longer be dehumanized. Actually, the only antidote we have to offer, and museums as well, is giving people a face and a voice in times of war. Because from then on, we have no choice but to see them, to look them in the eye, and listen to them.
Okay. That was the clip of Remembrance. Let's go to our questions. We received some.
Yes, there are some comments on Facebook and YouTube, and also two people have answered our survey online. Okay, let's start with a question from Clément. How do you work with classroom on the specific First World War traces in Flanders?
Hello?
Okay, we can
Yes,
hear you.
okay. All right. How do we work with classrooms on the specific First World traces in Flanders? When groups come over to our museum, and as a matter of fact, this is what we're really trying to do, bringing up to here, because we strongly believe that confrontation on the place where it happens is the strongest way to deal with it. So you have the story in the museum, but as a matter of fact, that's only just one small bit. It's kind of a trigger, because after the trigger, then you have to go on the field, in the landscape, and that's what we do as well. We're guiding groups into the landscape, going to the places where it happened, and then bringing the testimony on that spot. And the power of that combination, standing on the place where it happened with the testimony, is something that works for every classroom, as a matter of fact. So I hope this is more or less an answer on that question.
Okay, next question is from YouTube, Maria.
How can we teach remembrance in a way that situates contextually and at the same time see people as individuals and ones that are active agents? Yeah, good question as well. Thing is, when you bring a story of what happened more than 100 years ago, yes, you can use the testimonies and the story, but the context is even it's also very important. How those stories are written down, when they were written down, and why. Even the story of remembering is in that part also something to be critical about. Is why do we try to remember, and who's remembering it? So even I think by asking those questions is also a very important part of it. The regions where I live, I've already mentioned the fact that we have the daily confrontation with the result of war, because we have all those cemeteries and all those monuments. But nowadays, I think we have to think about, okay, but what are we remembering? And even those monuments, what are they trying? What kind of message are they trying to tell us? And having a discussion with school groups on that part is also very interesting. So making the context as clear as possible, as a matter of fact.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a look to our survey online. We have a question from Alice. You mentioned many extremely interesting projects and activities that can be done to bring students outside of the classroom and reflect on remembrance education. Do you have any advice for teachers on how to prepare their students before doing this?
My feeling is that first of all, you have more or less, and that sounds maybe strange, but you have to convince students the importance of, in our case, the story of the First World War, because they all have a kind of a feeling, yeah, it's something that happened 100 years ago, so why bother us? It's not our story at all. And as a kind of preparation, and in our context, the name list in that case is such an interesting tool, and you just can find the name list on our website, because you can come to the conclusion that the story is much closer than you ever thought. If you go to the name list, you can add the name of your own city more or less, and find out that people of your city died here in Belgium because of the First World War as well. Maybe just one small example to make clear what I'm talking about. And it was even not a youngster. It was a cab driver who came over. I had a meeting with somebody of Handicap International here, and he came by taxi. So we were having that meeting, and the cab driver just waiting in his car outside my desk. And after a while, I went outside and say, "Sorry, I think our meeting will take quite a long time. I have a ticket for the museum. Please go and visit the museum, and then we'll see each other afterwards again." The man, he was from Morocco, and Mustafa, he was very pleased to say, "Thank you very much for this ticket. I will visit the museum. I will see each other afterwards." 2 hours later, we met again. And he came to me and said he was really impressed. And then I mentioned, "Well, let me take you to one place." So we went to a French cemetery nearby, because I knew there were several soldiers from Morocco who were buried on that spot. And we went to that spot as well. And then he saw those graves, and it shocked him more or less. But the most strange thing happened afterwards. I was still talking with a man of Handicap International on the cemetery, and he was walking back to his cab, to his taxi. And on one spot, he stopped very on one grave, and I walked in this direction, said, "What's going on?" And he was really shocked. He said, "Look here, I found a headstone with my family name. My family name is Mustafa Damoni," and he found a headstone with the name Damoni. So for him, it was such a moving moment, realizing that the story of the First World War was even more or less the story of his family as well. And I think that is how you can make it more personal, first of all, to youngsters as well, starting to realize that it's, well, if everybody would start to dig in his own family story, there's a huge chance that on one spot, you will find the story of the First World War. And if you talk about remembrance, well, as a matter of fact, when people find out that you have some common story in your family line, well, it brings people together, and it brings people that they start to talk to each other as well. So for Mustafa, it was from that moment very clear, and he came back with his brothers and his family. Everybody had to see, yes, it's all our story as well. And that's what I was mentioning. You never can start a war when you're talking about us. You can start a war when you talk about we and them. But if you are in the possibility to create the story of us, well, forget it. You can't have war. Yes, you will have arguments, but you will deal with it. And that's more or less the idea of what we're trying to do as well.
Thank you. We have 2 other comments who are connected one to each other. Okay, very interesting to see how the nature and the trees can be used in remembering the past. You've shown an example, and this is Felix from Belgium speaking. I'm thinking of Canadian National Women Memorial with a tree for each soldier died. And then we have a comment from a question from Maria from Greece. I really appreciate the fact that you can have memorial sites without building. A simple tree can actually be a trace of the past. How do you evaluate these activities in terms of allowing educators to approach painful memory of the past with small children?
Well, maybe first of all, going to the story of the trees. So those trees are planted, and it starts from the Belgian coast until the border of France, where you have the front line planted in trees, bringing the story between, more or less 1915 and 1917, because that was the moment that the front line more or less stayed on the same spot. And as an educator, going on tour with school groups, it helps us a lot, because for many students, the idea of what's no man's land all about? That small piece of ground between those lines. What are you talking about? Well, those trees make it very, very concrete. You can stand on the spot, and you have one tree on the one side, the other tree on the other side, and then, well, they start to realize what everything it's all about. And talking about the silent witness, well, nature can bring you many reasons and many explanations as well. But I think there was another part in that question as well of how to deal with the story with youngsters, or
yes,
it was not just with...
It's like, how do we evaluate these activities in terms of allowing educators to approach the past with the small children? I think it's about the suitability of the activities for small children.
Yes. Well, for our education department, we start our educational work for youngsters from 10 years, not younger. That's more or less the line that we draw. And my experience as a teacher is in that reason important as well, because when I was a teacher, I more or less came to the conclusion that children from the age of 10, they are more or less allowed to see the world in a bigger view. And that's very important when you talk about war, because you can simplify war very easily in the goods and the bads, and the good has won, and that's it. And in the view of a school group of kids younger than 10, well, that's more or less a very dangerous path you're walking on. When at the age of 10, they're able to see all the colors between black and white as well, all those layers of gray, and those layers of gray are so important if you bring that story of war. So that's the main reason why we just start at the age of 10, and even then we have created a special path for them as well. We're not bringing the story of the First World War like we do it for youngsters of 16 to 18, as a matter of fact. But you can find on the website also many examples of how we deal with the several groups.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we don't have other questions for now.
Walter, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the touchstone you talked about, because you're a member of the Special Committee on Remembrance Education in Flanders. Can you tell something more about that?
Well, the touchstone that we created is a kind of a guideline that could help teachers when they want to do something about remembrance education, and is it about First World War, Second World War, or any other conflict you want to deal with. The touchstone could help you as a teacher of what kind of do's and don'ts are interesting if you keep a story of remembrance in mind. So that was the exercise we have done, and the scheme that we created in that way as well. Those 4 items, we strongly believe that if you create a project about remembrance, that if you have those 4 items reflecting knowledge and insight, empathy, and reflection action, if you have those 4 items in your project, well, then you can be sure that you have a very good project in your hands.
Okay, thank you, Walter. I don't know if there are any questions arriving now through our social media channels.
Not for now, but we will see.
Okay. Then let's continue with the program. I would like to give the floor to Alicia Modena from Euroclio, who will give some more information about one of our deliverables that we have in this RETHINK project. The floor is yours, Alicia.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I I think so, because I can hear myself coming back. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to very briefly introduce myself. My name is Alicia Modena. I am originally from Italy, but now work in the Netherlands at Euroclio, which is the European Association of History Educators. And as Isabel said, I am here to tell you a little bit more about the teacher's guide on remembrance education that we have created as part of the project. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint because I want to show you where you can find the teacher's guide and how the teacher's guide is structured. But before entering a little bit more into the teacher's guide, I just wanted to tell you a couple of words about how we went about developing it. Well, partly because we developed it starting from the database of practices that Morgan talked about yesterday, and partly because I think it was a very interesting development process, and I would like to share it with you. So how did we go about? We started by selecting model practices among the partners. Every partner in the project presented to the group a couple of practices, a couple of activities that they do on a regular basis. And we selected some that looked good, or that it looked like they could be transferred to other contexts quite easily. And then we selected some additional practices from the database to test also those. And then we carried out what the European Union likes to call upscaling, which broadly speaking means we selected the practices, we studied the steps that each practice entailed, and then we tried the practices out either in different national contexts. So for example, Nena yesterday was mentioning that she tried out a couple of practices from Kazerne do Sen in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or with a different audience. So some practices that were created for students have been tried out with teacher trainees or with members of the police force or so on, or with different content. And this is still the case, for example, of Nena, who tried out a practice about teaching about the Holocaust. She tried to adapt it to the content of the dissolution of Yugoslavia. From all this upscaling, from all these trials, we then tried to gather some lessons that we learned and some practical tips and tricks based on these lessons that we learned that we could share with teachers and with practitioners out there. And this is where the teacher's guide comes from. The people that tried out the practices authored many of the chapters or of the sections of the teacher's guide, together with another couple of experts that we called in to author the teacher's guide. So I wanted to share a little bit about this creation process, because to me it's important that, or to us, it's important that the teacher's guide is based on real experience, is based on what we experienced trying to bring remembrance education to the classroom, which is what we were talking about today. And well, I'm happy for the questions that came into Wouter, because we actually there are some parts of the teacher's guide that are exactly about preparing to visit to a site, dealing with sensitive topics, creating a safe learning environment. There are many sections that I believe are quite well connected to what Nena was talking about yesterday, or to what Wouter was talking about earlier. So I am going to share my screen. I want to share, I want to share this screen. Okay, let me just wait a couple of seconds. Okay, you should now be able to see my screen with this beautiful painting. And I would like to show you how to reach the teacher's guide. It's fairly easy. You just need to go on the RETHINK website. So RETHINK at education.eu. And then in this section on the resources, you can find everything. Some of you have already seen it yesterday, because this is also where you can find the database. And if you click on A Teacher's Guide to Remembrance Education, you end up on the landing page of the Teacher's Guide. I particularly today want to tell you a little bit more about the content of the Teacher's Guide and then the practices. So if you want to access the teacher's guide, you will click on download the teacher's guide, and here it is. Now, the teacher's guide is structured in a fairly user-friendly way. After the list of contributors, these are the experts that contributed to creating the content and of the editors who put together the teacher's guide and did language editing. You will find an introduction on the project. And then we start by defining what is Remembrance education to us, which is fairly important because during the project, we recognize that there are various definitions of Remembrance education out there. And then there's a little part about the, I hope you can still hear me because the printer started, but there's still a little part about how to make the past relevant for today, which in particular goes into detail on dealing with controversial issues, on dealing with post-conflict settings, and on dealing with competing narratives of remembrance. And then we go into very practical parts with tips and tricks for teachers. So we talk about creating a safe learning environment, being aware of our own attitudes as teachers, how to include students with a diverse background, especially students with a migrant background. And then we go into methodologies and approaches, and into the preparation for a visit to a Remembrance site. I wanted to show you the teacher's guide as it is, because I wanted to show you a little bit how it looks like. And in particular, I want to refer to this kind of text boxes that we have interspersed to the teacher's guide. We have designed the teacher's guide to be a unitary document that stands on its own and that you can, download and read and use to prepare your lessons using Remembrance education. However, we have also designed it so that it can be used in complementarity with the database of practices, but also with our e-learning platform that Alicia will introduce soon. And throughout the teacher's guide, you can find text boxes that will tell you when you can find more information about a specific topic on the e-learning platform. They will give you some examples, and that will connect you to some practices. These are the practices that we tried to upscaled. And these are also quite interesting and relevant. And I will tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. Well, actually, this is what I wanted to share with you about the teacher's guide. I would invite you all to download it and to have a look at it and to let us know your thoughts on social media. And I wanted then also to show you that if you go on the same page, so Rethink Education.eu, and then resources, and then a teacher's guide, all the way at the bottom of the page, you can find also the practices that we mentioned throughout the teacher's guide, including, I believe, a practice, Ordinary Heroes, that was the practice that Nana mentioned yesterday. Now, we would warmly recommend all of you to use the practices in together with the teacher's guide, because the teacher's guide gives you hands-on practical tips and tricks that you can use to implement these kind of activities. But I wanted to show you a little bit how it looks like, because for how it is, we have tried to create a practice, to create a downloadable document, that you can use to carry out the practice in your classroom, or in the case of this specific activity, also in your adult education setting, with little adaptation required. And so you will find, the structure of the lecture, a description of the activity. This is quite a long description of the activity. You go. And at the very bottom, you will find also some suggestions for assessment if they are available. And in the fact sheet, you will find a description and what is the inquiry question that this activity tries to answer, together with some information that you need. So, for example, where do you find the material? How do you go about with the activity, and so on. Again, these are not meant to be used on their own. They are meant to be used together with the teacher's guide and together with the content of the e-learning platform. So I think I will very quickly give the floor to Alessia and invite you all to type in any questions that you might have on the teacher's guide in the comments, and we will take on your questions after the presentation of the e-learning platform, since they go so much hand in hand.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, I jump on the stage talking about the RETHINK Learning platform. As you could see in these days, while we were talking about the RETHINK project and its results, the RETHINK project was a long process. We worked 3 years on our results. And after the database, so after the collection of the database, after the upscaling, so the trial of all these practices, then we decided to go further and do also a need analysis to be sure of what we were working with. And we investigated the current teacher practices on remembrance education and history teaching to understand how teachers approach remembrance education and challenging topics, and how they deal with fostering critical thinking and media literacy in their students. The results are in our need analysis, so you can find it on our website. Okay. I share my screen, and if you go on RETHINK Learning platform, you will be able to find our need analysis report at the bottom of the page to discover how many teachers we involved in the research. They were teachers from all over Europe, and the current results of the need analysis. So what was born of this needs analysis is the RETHINK Learning platform, which is a response to the challenges teachers met when dealing with the remembrance education and challenging issues. In their daily practice, when they need to integrate their teaching routine, teachers often, in our analysis, we discovered that the teacher often refers to established lesson plan, history didactic training, as well as guidelines and resources from international organizations like the European Union or the UNESCO. However, some teachers admit there being short training on new methods and approaches. So the RETHINK Learning platforms allows you to be a click away from a free learning based on the good practice and experience of our partnership, and learning which is accessible to anybody through an internet connection. As you can see from our website, you can enter the platform from 2 main ways. You go to resources and you click on RETHINK Learning platform, or if not, you just scroll the home page, and on the Our Resources box, you find the RETHINK Learning platform. So the platform offers online training modules covering main topics related to remembrance education and critical thinking. These training modules are arranged on 4 main categories: making the past relevant for today, applying multi-perspectivities to remembrance education, methodologies and approaches, and challenging exclusion, thinking critically. So let's enter the platform. Okay, as you can see, you can enter the platform by logging in as guest or with credential. To obtain your credential, you just have to create a new account. Let's log in with a credential and navigate to the platform. So we have 8 training modules. The first one is Making the Past Relevant for Today, which was developed by Caserta-Sen. The second one is Multi-Perspectivities in Remembrance Education, developed by Euroclio. Then we have 3 modules which are focused on methodologies and approaches. The first one is Preparation for a Visit to a Remembrance Site, which was developed by the Holocaust Education Trust Ireland. The second one is Teaching with Video Testimonies of Victims of National Socialism, developed by Erin Nern from Austria. The third one is making the most of digital archiving class, which was developed by the Jewish Historical Institute of Poland. And then we have 3 last modules who are focused on critical thinking, challenging exclusion, thinking critically. So the first one is dealing with hate speech, which was focused on the experience of CESIE from Italy. The second one is addressing propaganda today, which was developed by Casardossen. The third one is prejudice and stereotypes in history and everyday lives, which was developed by the Memorial de la Shoah of Paris. So let's navigate a little bit our platform. Okay. Let's open a module. Allora, all training modules will give you a description of their learning outcomes, as well as a preview of their content, so that you can check what you're going to learn and if the course is actually right for you. Each training modules require less of 1 hour each of learning effort to be completed, as they were thought for teachers who have very limited time or time restriction on their own. So you can just navigate the modules, choose which is the better one for them. And we thought that having modules who are really short in time would be a best option for the teachers. So let's go in the home again. Inside the modules, there are course material, exercise, interactive content, such as presentation, videos, quizzes, and much more. I will show you now a short preview. Okay, as you can see, these are activities taken from the learning platform from different modules. In the platform, you can have access to presentation from our partners, as well as documents. Sometimes you have also original sources or links on how to access first sources. Then you have quizzes, multiple choice, true-false question, which are a way to test your knowledge ongoing, and also a way to give feedback according to your experience. Then we have videos and interactive videos, and other interactive activities you may find on the platform are image hotspot, dialogue card, drag and drop task, which we think it's really useful to test your knowledge while going on the courses, but also, and most of all, extra materials. At the end of this course or inside the courses, you can, partners of the project have put extra materials or link to other activities you can use with your classroom. Like, for example, the Jewish Historical Forum promoted the DLIT archive, which is a digital archive where students can enter and use first-hand sources to actually create posters and presentation on their own. We have the Early Learner app, which is a really interesting way to interact with the video testimonies of survivors. We have also handbooks, lesson plans. Some partners also added the list of database handbooks, organizations who are offering other online courses which are related to the topic. So, who created the training modules? You find in the platform the training modules were created by the partnership, which are all professional in the field. So yesterday, Clement Bardou, our coordinator, presented our partnership during the yesterday section, but you can still learn about us going into the RETHINK website. We have a specific section where you can find information about the partnership. And in case you can reach us to discover more about the project just by contacting us, which is another section you will find in the menu. I catch the opportunity to thank again the staff of the Visibility and Communication Department of CESIE, who not only help us to bring the platform alive, but who are also taking care of our product, like, for example, the cover of the teacher's guide Alice has presented, or the RETHINK database, and all this stuff is still supporting us in our communication efforts like this conference. So what do you receive once you have completed the training modules on the RETHINK Learning platform? If you go on your profile, once you have completed the course, you receive a badge for each course, which is automatically marked on your profile, and you get a notification by email. After completion of 5 training modules, so after obtaining at least 5 badges, you obtain a RETHINK certificate. The main thing here is that you are learning new knowledge and upscaling your teaching practices, which is really our main goal in building this platform. Please take note that in order for your results to be tracked, in order to receive the badge and the certificate, you need to be enrolled in the platform, so you have to create a profile. You can have a look as guest. For example, if I log out, sorry, made a mistake. If I log out from the platform, I can still enter the platform as guest. I can enter one module, have a look at the description of the modules, some activities, but there are some activities I cannot enter because they are restricted and just for the people who are in the platform. So if you aim for a badge or a certificate, please remember to enroll and log in. And it will allow you also to access all the extra materials I talked about. And now I would like to know if we have some comments from internet, from our survey. I'll check. Okay, we have one question from internet. How satisfied are you with the RETHINK Learning platform, and when will the certificate be awarded? Okay, I know that this is the official launch of the platform. I know that there are people who already have obtained their badge and are still waiting for the certificate. We are in the process of delivering the certificate. We are checking all the profiles of the people who have reached the 5 badge limit, and we will send the certificate in the next weeks. And according to how satisfied are you with the RETHINK Learning platform? We are really proud of this platform. We are proud of the fact that there is a lot of interactivities, that the modules are really different one from each other, not just for the content, but also from the approach. They reflect the approach every organization has in its teaching and in the different expertise of the people who have developed the content. Here, for example, we have Alice and Isabel who have worked with the Caserta and Euroclio in developing the modules about dealing with propaganda, making the past relevant for today, and multi-perspectivity in remembrance education. I want to thank you and all partners who have contributed to the modules. We are proud of the platform. We like the fact that it has really attracted a lot of public. We didn't expect such a result, but we expect the platform to be relevant for people who are engaging in the topic of remembrance education. So we encourage you to try the modules, discover all the RETHINK project results, and also to spread the word with your colleagues, all people who may have an interest in history teaching and remembrance education, how to approach challenging topics with the children and young students, because all the RETHINK results, I think they constitute a strong basis for all people who want to engage into the topic. And I don't have any other question about the platform, neither about the teacher's guide. No.
Okay, thank you, Alicia and Alice, for presenting those two deliverables, and I can confirm that that also Kazan Docent is very proud of what we achieved all together with the platform and the teacher's guide, of course. If there are no questions anymore, I would like to wrap up, in fact, and invite you to our third session tomorrow. That will take place from 10 till 1. To get access, you can go to our website and find the logos to go on the YouTube channel or our Facebook page. And please, like we asked yesterday, fill in our evaluation form by scanning this QR code or by clicking on the link that will appear in the chat. And we'd love to see you back again tomorrow.
Yes, thank you, Isabel.
Thank you.